Welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Brandon, and today we're looking at post-ban list data live. Starting off, let's look at the ban list itself for data live. So data live, we have a limit of 2 copies of the Terrible Spirit Kermi, which is your top end for your standby combo. And then in addition to that, we have the choice restrictions. We could choose one of 3 options to be able to put in our deck alongside that, of up to 4 copies of it. So we have For the Sky and Sword Toka, Spring Uniform Toka, and a Spring Moment Yoshino. These 3 pieces here are key pieces to try to help continually keep board, keep a defensive presence that is very difficult to deal with, both with power or with field swapping. And then also with the back row scry ability to be able to try to better compress your deck to, in the long run, be able to cancel more often. Bushiroad noted that these 4 pieces were the main problems with the 8 standby deck and some of its oppressiveness against other decks. So with the choice restriction and the limiting of the top end, it is attempting to try to balance the game in some way. With that in mind, the deck, from what it used to be, needs to now look different. Throw up a copy here of the pre-ban list stuff. This is kind of an example of what Data Live could have looked like before the ban list, where you see all 3 key pieces there, and those were used relatively in conjunction with each other on the field at the same time. With that in mind, I have 3 different builds looking at each one of the choice pieces to see how you could still build 8 standby Data Live with those different choices. Let's look first with the Brainstormer. So here's our new updated list with the Brainstormer. I'm not going to go into all of these pieces individually. A lot of these pieces we've covered multiple times with other deck lists leading up into this one. So if you want to check some of those pieces and more specifically, I'll have a link in the description to those deck videos where we talk about some of those pieces in a little bit more detail. I'm going to highlight some of the additions or changes from what we saw that previous list to this one. One of the big key changes here is the addition of the Riki. Did add the Riki in later in with Nightmare Queen Kermi. This card allows us to be able to get to 1 first to try to help establish that board with 2/2s on field ready to go. It also helps accelerate that game state to that point so we can get the big bodies on field first. That's one of the big key things that needs to happen with this deck. You need to get the big bodies on field. You need to be able to win board. When you win board, then you can start pushing your advantage. I did include a couple copies of the Drop Search. A couple different things that this has in here. The Drop Search does add a little bit of power to your 2/2s when it comes on field at that point. It does allow for a little bit of hand filter. It powers up your 2/2s and beyond, so you can get just a little bit more power on offense. And it's also green fix, because we're going to need that green for our level 3 game. Looking at level 1, you'll notice there's 2 copies of the long range shot origami. So it can give one of your characters 3,000 power on the beginning of climax phase. So you can choose one of your characters and give that pretty sizable amount of power to be able to step over things. So you can win board offensively very easily with that then. That pushes like your 2/2s from 10-5 to 13-5 by itself. 14-5 if you have the Brainstormer alongside it, which you probably will. On turns that you're not brainstorming, you can use this to discard the event to do 2 different actions. You can either look at 2 from the top of your deck, choose one, discard the other, or you can choose one of your opponent's characters and that character cannot stand during your opponent's next stand phase. So you could potentially lock standby targets in the back row. You could deny back row pieces from standing on that next turn so they can't get additional benefit from using them, like Brainstormers. So it's kind of like an anti-standby piece. It's very circumstantial for using that, but you do have that in place. It's really for the power and the potential that might need for with some of this event stuff. The only other additional card in this list is that basic Realizer event, where you have a split neg3 soul counter. So you can split it up depending on what's going on and what's facing against you. So you could either put it all in one lane or you could spread across all 3. You can use it effectively at 3. So you only really need green in your clocker level by 3. This deck is essentially tricolor, although in many ways you're not really playing blue from hand very often. So you don't necessarily need to worry as much about blue in your clock level as much as trying to get that red, yellow, green. So at the top, you really want to be playing green from hand, and it may be beneficial to play yellow from hand. So really highlighting that red level 1 and then getting green and yellow in there at some point. The drop search really helps with that. Even copies of the basic realizer itself can help with that. So you have ways of getting it. There's enough green in here that you can tech that in for that level 3. There's a little bit more yellow, so you can get away with yellow a little bit earlier. For reference, it is 4 colors, but you're really looking not focusing on blue for this. But this is the deck list overall that looks like with the Brainstormer. I'm really kind of focusing in on defense at the top with the Neg Soul event and power offensively during the mid game with the long range shot origami. The Brainstormer itself is the one that grants cross-turn power, so you are able to pump things up additionally. So you could potentially be over in multiple lanes with the Brainstormer and the long range shot origami going off at the same time. But the Brainstormer in this case here is really used to continually free up that spot for standby targets and is a really good, effective tool to continually get resources back into hand. Here's an additional list looking at the school uniform Toko, the back row scry. A little bit different than a previous list. I don't run the basic realizer engine here. Instead, because the Toka really focuses on defensive power, you have a little bit more emphasis for that defense with cards such like the Spirit Barrier Toka, which allows you to, on play, give one of your characters 1500 power cross turn. So in many ways, it's kind of mimicking that kind of brainstorm power that you would have gotten elsewise. It's essentially doing the same thing as the School Uniform Toka, except School Uniform Toka can do it repetitively at the beginning of your opponent's draw phase. Because we can't run the Toka Brainstormer, we have the Declaration of War Queen. This allows us to be able to salvage Brainstorm instead of search. And it has the alternative ability to be able to, on play, pay 2 to move one of your opponent's characters to another open position. So this can help you in a couple different ways. You can move things to the back if you need to. You can move things forward if you need to. I found this a really helpful tool if you want to get reverses with your 2/2, but you've already cleared board once. You can bring some of their back row pieces forward to get that reverse to scry on your turn, so you can then scry on your opponent's turn as well when they get reversed into you. It is a little expensive for that ability. I do run My Little Shido in this deck, in part because you also have like the slots to be able to do that a little bit more. With the School Uniform Toka, you throw this in the back row. You can use My Little Shido with the School Uniform Toka, so you tap that card to do whatever effect you're trying to do. And then you also have the Brainstormer essentially next to it to be able to then tap that as well to do its Brainstorm effect. So you can have multiple things going on at once in the back row, and it frees that up a little bit to be able to work together. The only other real new card attached with this is the 3/2 Ifrit Coterie. This is a card that can change into a different climax combo, but this one also has on attack, reveal the top card, and if it is a character or an event, you may deal 1 damage. So it's potential on attack burn 1, which I found to be a very helpful tool alongside some of the other pieces that already exist. Recognize it doesn't heal, but if you also don't have the stock for multiple Kurumis and a Icy Tail, you could throw this down instead and still get an additional burn instance off to potentially deal that last little bit of damage. For example, if you're swinging into open lanes at the top end and you have 2 of the Terrible Spirit Kurumis, you could potentially burn 3, swing for 3, burn 3, swing for 3. And if 2 of the 4 stick and you only need to burn 1, Ifrit Coterie is right on target to get that last burn 1 in. The last list that I have is very similar to the previous one. It's working with the Spring Moment Yoshino. The level 0 lineup looks exactly the same as the previous list. At 1, instead of having the back row Scry, we have the 1/1 Yoshino. This allows you to be able to field swap very efficiently. Yoshino is also a threat with the anti-change stock bomb effect on it to threaten your opponent's standby boards. So with Yoshino on the field, all of a sudden your field has this great threat on it. This can also allow you to save characters that you already have on field. You'll notice the big difference between this list and other lists, that this one runs only the 2/2 with the hand-on core as opposed to the 2/2 Toka with the additional 500 power. And when it scores reverse, gets Scry. This one specifically is really about saving cards. Yoshino's not very big, but Yoshino can deal damage effectively to wherever it is. Wherever it is on stage is immediately a threat. So making sure you have a full board every turn is very essential with this deck, so Yoshino can present its threat in any lane. So we have a lot of defensive measures in place with that. The Spirit Barrier Toka and the number of counters that this deck runs in order to make that happen. Endgame, very similar from before, Ifrit Coterie attached with the top end. Looking at all of these lists have very similar ideas as to what they're trying to do, right? They're all doing the 8 standby route. They're trying to get big, stay big, and close the game out with Kurumi at the top. All of these lists work fairly effectively and very reminiscent of the pre-ban list Daily Live that we're all familiar with. Limiting some of the explosiveness at the top to be able to help close out games does affect its reach slightly and its consistency in the mid-game. However, Data Live is still relatively similar to what it was. Data Live is a set that has a lot of tools in it, and those tools can help make up for some of the restrictions that the deck now has. We're only really looking at the 8 standby lists because those are the lists that are most drastically affected by these tools and by these restrictions. So we wanted to look at those ones specifically with this video. There are other builds that Data Live has to offer, but looking specifically at standby and how standby was targeted by the ban list, this allows standby to still continue, just in slightly different form. With that, this has been post-ban 8 standby Data Live with 3 different options depending on which piece you have the bigger preference for. We're going to have gameplay for one of these builds on Thursday. On Tuesday, we're going to have a clock talk. We're going to talk about some of the things that happened on the stream this Friday, where it talked about English Weiss Schwarz and what that looked like. In addition, maybe potentially also talking about some of the different Spring Fests that have happened to this point. So we're looking forward to that. We're looking forward to seeing what that stream has to offer. But until next time, be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, and have a good one.